Another weird thing about Master of Puppets, what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of the album is tuned to 435, not 440.
Oh, getting all tricky with the tuning.
So it's a little bit lower, which gives it, I guess, that evil type of sound. So if you're ever playing along to Master of Puppets and it doesn't quite sound right, it's because your guitar is not tuned to 435.
Or your turntable sucks. Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Today's episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is sponsored by Roswell Pro Audio, maker of handcrafted microphones in California. Inspired design and impeccable attention to detail will help you capture a gorgeous vintage sound without the vintage price tag. Check out their beautiful line of microphones at roswellproaudio.com. You may already know that using true analog gear is one of the best ways to create a great record. Yet increasingly, we live in a digital world, recording and mixing inside the computer. So what if you could have the best of both worlds? Tigler Audio Manufaktur is bridging the analog-digital divide by creating high-end analog gear like the Schwerkraftmaschine compressor and the Raumzeitmaschine reverb, whose knobs you can control remotely using a plug-in in your DAW. Or their many analog units like the Cream bus compressor with mastering EQ, or the Veritube recording channel that let you save your settings using a custom Recall Sheet plugin, offering a complete line of pro audio gear from compressors to EQs to reverbs and beyond. Now you can get a pro analog sound while benefiting from the power of digital. Let your DAW help you move your knobs so that your music can move you. Click the link in the show notes to learn more about Tigler Audio Manufaktur. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Johnnie Truesdale, a Grammy-winning engineer, producer, mastering engineer, and audio teacher. Originally from Pennsylvania, Johnnie went to school at SAE Institute in New York City in the audio technology program. He then went on to work at Bennett Studios in Englewood, New Jersey, with classic artists such as Steve Martin, Tony Bennett, Harry Belafonte, Anita Baker, Ravi Coltrane, John Patitucci, and Andy LeBurn. He also got experience working with great producers like Phil Ramone and John McEwen. In 2011, he moved to Los Angeles to become a teacher at the SAE Institute in Los Angeles, and recently moved to Nashville to build his own recording, mixing, and mastering studio, Firefly Sound, in Brentwood, Tennessee. Today, we have incredible digital tools available to us in the studio through modern DAWs and plugins that can do things that were never even possible 10 or 20 years ago. But sometimes we find ourselves making records that can feel a little too digital and long for the sound of the classic analog albums that we grew up with. Johnnie has experience working with both analog and digital and is going to talk about the ways that he gets the best of both worlds in the studio. So the theme of today's episode is to learn how to sound analog in a digital world. Please welcome Johnnie Truesdale to Recording Studio Rockstars. Johnnie, you ready to rock, dude?
You bet I am.
Dude, it's so nice to be here in your beautiful studio, which is looking gorgeous already. We spent a little bit of time talking about it. You're still in the process of kind of, finishing the final touches. But tell us a little bit about, who you are and where we are right now.
We're in Brentwood, Tennessee. So as you can attest, when you came up here, I'm kind of, it seems like I'm in the middle of nowhere, but I'm not. So that's the good part is I'm kind of away from things, but not really. It looks like it. I have about 10 acres around here. I'm kind of surrounded mostly by woods. So it's a real beautiful environment to be around on a daily basis. It's kind of great to be able to go to work and just go next door to my studio and do my thing.
So yeah, you're up on a top of a gorgeous hill here. I mean, just driving out here is so beautiful out in the woods. You got 7 acres right next to you to go, for runs in the morning before hitting the studio. It's gorgeous, man. Tell us a little bit about your background. I gave a quick recap, but who you are. How'd you get into this recording thing? What made you want to get started on this? Just give us a short version.
Technically, I started as a professional. I started a little later. I didn't start until I was in my early 30s, but I did it kind of on the side, and I liked it. So I was a guitar player. I've been a guitar player since 1989.
I see a nice sunburst Les Paul. No, an ESP.
ESP Eclipse. It's an
Eclipse.
ESP.
Nice.
I do have a Les Paul. It's just not in this room. So, yeah, and I decided that I had enough. I was doing computer stuff, and I decided that I just wanted to record and mix and master and the whole bit. That's what I wanted to do. And I quit my day job and I went to SAE, and everybody said I was crazy. So, that's the first thing. Everybody's going to think you're crazy for wanting to do this, but I think if you really want to do it, you'll find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, so SAE on the East Coast, but then you ended up teaching at SAE on the West Coast?
Yeah, I actually started. Okay, so I was working at the studio. I was working at Bennett Studios. Right after I got out of school, I started working there immediately. And then I was asked by my former teacher to come and teach the SSL. They had an SSL 4000G. And he asked me to come teach that in New York City. So I actually started teaching about 8 months before I left to go to California. So I started teaching in New York. And then when I went to LA, I just got into contact with them in LA and started teaching over there.
Nice. Well, so tell us more about Bennett Studios. I mean, what an incredible list. I mean, Steve Martin, Tony Bennett, Harry Belafonte.
Yeah.
These are some great individuals, great singers. Anita Baker.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that, man. Share a great story about working with Steve Martin, for example.
Steve Martin, here's the funny thing. So I recorded Steve Martin's first album called The Crow. It's his first banjo album. He actually had a bunch of comedy albums back in the 70s. But it's his first banjo album. So some of these songs he wrote when he was like 11, 12 years old, which is pretty phenomenal if you think like he was, I think, almost 70 at the time when he did that album. So he came in and he was very nervous about recording. He had never really recorded like that before. So very serious. So you think of like Steve Martin as this like crazy like comedian. And I heard he's doing like a master class teaching on doing comedy stuff. But when he does music, it's like completely the opposite. Like he's like super, super serious.
That's awesome.
And he's super worried about like getting everything right and all this stuff. So the majority of the album was recorded live, and we just put everybody in a semicircle and record it in the big live room. So to break Bennett Studios down for you, because you can't really look this up, it doesn't exist anymore. We had two rooms. One was called North, one was called South. North had a Neve. It was I think it was a 1987 VR series, 60 channel. Mm-hmm. And then there's an 80 channel SSL G in South, which was a much smaller studio. The Neve live room was a very, very big live room. So probably the live room itself, I don't know, 1,500, 1,700 square feet.
Okay. And live sounding too, or did?
No, it was all designed. It was all, kind of almost so my control room that we're in right now is an homage to Bennett Studios.
Okay.
The Bennett Studios looked almost exactly like this, except for the color of my wood is a different color.
Nice.
So I went with it. So it's really my shout out to, the studio I worked at. The studio unfortunately closed in 2011, not long after I left. Dave Bennett, who was Tony Bennett's son, who owned it, just decided he just did not want to do a studio anymore. And as I used to help him with that, I used to help him do a lot of the day-to-day stuff with the studio, which is great because I've learned a lot about working in a studio and working with clients, and that's stuff that you can't ever get, if you just come up and you come out of nowhere, you're not going to know how to deal with clients and what they're going to say. Because I've heard everything, like every excuse why I can't pay money or why I can't do this or whatever the case may be. So you kind of learn how to deal with people and what not to say. And, and that was, he taught me that, because Dave's been a recording engineer since the early 80s. So
That's cool, man. Well, let's talk a little bit more about doing Steve Martin's record in a circle, because I love that idea. And occasionally I get to do something like that. And other times I see pictures of somebody's session like that. Headphones or no headphones for a session like that. The room is big. Are the musicians much closer to each other than they are from the walls of the room?
Oh yeah, they were kind of at the center of the room, and I have some pictures. So what I'll do is I'll send them your way if you want to put them up on the site, and you can kind of. I was smart enough to go, this is kind of cool. I should take some pictures. So I actually took some pictures at the time, and it'll give you an idea of what the circle looked like and all that. But yeah, I don't recall them having headphones on, but maybe we gave them headphones, but I don't know if they used them. I can't really remember.
Okay, so but a circle or a semicircle, did you say?
No, it was a total circle.
Total circle. And then everybody's facing each other.
They're all facing each other, and then outside we built a little fort around the upright base. Like kind of like a little
describe that.
A little gobo fort around the upright base, and he was right outside the circle, looking into the circle. So the violins, you had the violins, you have the mandolin, you had a couple banjos, acoustic guitar, all around in a semicircle, and just all live. So most of the album is live with vocal overdubs and occasional acoustic guitar and banjo overdubs.
Do you remember anything about mic choices that you might have used for different instruments? Like, of course, we want to know, like, what'd you mic up Steve Martin's banjo with?
With an old RCA,
a ribbon or
the ribbon, the old big ones were
like the 44, the 77.
Yeah, the 44, an old 44.
Really? No shit. Wow,
an old cool. 44 on the front with a KM 184, and on the back on the resonator, because I actually was taught this by John McEwen. If you don't know who John McEwen is, he's the banjo player in the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band.
That's right. I think he actually signed my banjo.
Right. So he he suggested to me, and this is a tip. Listen to them when they know more about an instrument than you'll ever know.
Right.
And he said, let's put another one of the microphones on the backside, on the resonator, on the backside of the resonator. So on Steve's, there's a microphone in the back. So there's two microphones in the front and one in the back.
So he was sitting down. Yeah, he's sitting down. The banjo is kind of like in his lap, but it's going off to the side just a little bit. So some of that resonator kind of you can see from behind him or something, and you under his arm.
And you just kind of like a snapshot with the little KM 184 from the back.
It's just picking up the wood, the sound of the wood.
Yep.
Cool, man.
And they used that in the mix. I didn't mix the album, but I know it was there. I did the rest of the overdubs and all that stuff too.
And so the RCA 44, where do you think about it sort of looking straight on at the center of the banjo head, or is it sort of more like a 12th fret approach like you might use for an acoustic guitar?
Because it's I don't know if have you ever used one of them? They kind of capture a lot.
Right.
So they're not really super focused. It's not like this focused, like KM 184 is a much more focused microphone.
Right.
And those RCA 44s are super big and heavy, by the way. They're really heavyweight. I remember sandbagging it. We had to sandbag the Atlas stand like majorly so it wouldn't fall into him. But really kind of just like a snapshot of him sitting down. Right? Like right in it. His chest area, kind of.
Cool, interesting, fascinating.
Kind of.
And Rockstar's a reminder that a RCA 44 as a ribbon has a figure 8 pattern, which means it's rejecting very severely. It's rejecting the sides to the left and the right of the mic. So in that way, if you had another musician kind of in that rejection zone, that mic is going to really pick up the banjo, but it's not going to pick up the musician right next to him, which is a pretty hip thing. But then, as a figure 8, it is going to pick up whatever is across the circle.
Right, which I believe was across from him, I believe was violin.
Cool.
There was a violin on the other side.
Another good choice for ribbons.
But see, again, this is what we did at that studio a lot, which I'm really glad that I was able to be involved with, was recording things live. And I know that you do a lot of that. And I think that if you can record people in one room together and then make it sound good, I think you can do anything.
Yeah.
I think that's, it's easy to record one instrument at a time, but then I think you lose the feel a little bit. And I think that's part of the feel of that album, is that most of it is live with a few little overdubs here and there.
Yeah. Well, so tell us a story also about what you might have learned from working with Phil Ramone. Was that somebody you worked with at Bennett Studios?
Yeah. So Phil, who's no longer with us, if you don't know, Phil did he did Barbra Streisand back in the day. He did all the really great Billy Joel stuff. But he came in to do some Tony Bennett stuff. And I would just be in the room. I was an assistant on most of those sessions, but he would just tell you story after story about, you could see, one of the things I would say that I learned the most from Phil Ramone is how to talk to the artists. So when the artist is struggling, how Phil would talk to them and get them back in the zone and that sort of thing.
That's cool. What do you remember? Like what give us a...
Just the way he would, if something was completely awful, Lidge, and look, and you would, and as awful as Tony Bennett could be when he's awful is better than some
Still
people.
Pretty good.
Yeah. on their best day. But if somebody's phoning a performance in or so to speak, he just can detect it and just kind of talk to them and just be very like, why don't we try it like this, or like really like very not negative.
He
like,
wasn't on the talk about going like, Tony, that sucks. Come on, man, get it together.
Right. No. Because for the most part, I feel that all the sessions I've ever seen or even stuff that I've done, that whole negative vibe doesn't work very well. I don't know. Maybe some people are like, oh, that works on me. I'm like, I don't know. I think if somebody explains to you what they're doing wrong, I think you benefit more from it.
Do you remember when you were starting out, at all being intrigued by the negative stories and the sort of the studio lore that you would hear about how much of a hard ass such and such a producer would be, or excuse me, when somebody screwed up, they were fired and they were out on their ass. Do you remember that being intriguing to you? Because I do. I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit of a dummy, but I remember thinking that there was something about that I think can be confusing too when you're starting, because you don't really know, well, what's the best way to make a record? And you hear a story about somebody who's a tyrant in the studio, and you're like, oh, maybe that's how you make the best records.
Right. I don't know that I guess I came across a few guys that were like that, but I was like maybe an assistant at the time, or I'm just the recording engineer. And that's another thing, that there's a big difference between being the engineer and being the producer. If you're being the engineer, you should just really kind of focus on being the engineer.
Yeah.
And not
doing it well.
Yeah. So make it sound good. And that's, let the producer do his job, and don't get dragged into an argument between a producer and an artist. That's the worst thing in the world. They'll try to drag you in, and you're like, well, that's really up to you guys. You got to learn to be, because then they'll blame you for it. And you said that it was like this. And it's like, and so as an engineer, there's a very big difference. I think you have to be there's a very fine line. If you want to, a lot of times when I'm saying, do you want me to engineer this, or do you want me to engineer and produce this? Because there's a very different line between that. If I'm engineering, then you're going to call all the shots, and I'm just going to make it sound right.
Right.
And that's it. That's the way it's going to work,
And do you feel like as an engineer, you'll point out when the guitar sounds out of tune? Kind of hard to turn that off, isn't it?
Right. No, anything like that would be for sure. Yeah. Like I would definitely bring that attention. But if it's, bring it to the producer. If the producer's right next to you, bring it up to the producer.
Yeah. So as an engineer, though, you won't suggest that a particular chord would be a good choice to go to.
No.
Yeah.
No, not once. I say as an engineer, I say that you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I say you got to be careful. And you know how fragile musicians and producers and other people are. So you got to watch everybody's ego. And that could be, if you say the wrong thing, then they might go, I don't want that kid on my project anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's a creative vibe. If you're not making it easy for the artist to feel creative and relaxed, then they're going to just be like, this isn't the right way to do it. We need to change something.
Right. And how else are you going to learn, really? I mean, I think you have to watch others. So I learned a lot from watching others, and I got a really good reputation with the clients that I had at the studio of, I was really good at explaining things to people. So I really liked to explain what I was doing, and people really liked to listen. I think that's how I figured out I could teach, is that artists would be like, well, how's this work? And I would be like, and they would see the big 60 channel Neve console and they're like, oh my God, this thing is like Star Trek. And you're like, not really. It just kind of repeats itself 60 times. And then there's this little section in the middle that does some stuff. Yeah. And then when you would explain that to them, they'd be like, oh, wow, that's like so much, that's like amazing. Or you'd say, like, I like to liken placing microphones like taking a picture. So if I place the microphone back here, that picture is going to be a wider picture. If I place it up here, then that's going to be a tighter angle or so forth and so on.
That's cool, man. I like that. I learned a little bit about that from Brad Jones, who's my mentor. He used to talk about recording a drum set and positioning the microphone like it can see different things. Yeah. And that gave me that understanding of thinking about it like, oh, okay, let's just pretend it's an eye. It's a camera looking at what it's recording.
I still think like that. It's kind of crazy. So I'll think, okay, and I'll just be like, okay, what's it taking a picture of? It's, and that's how I do it to this day. I don't measure anything.
So here is a comparison that recently occurred to me as I was thinking about, what was I doing? I guess I was just learning more about a new camera that I have. I'm trying to get my video quality better for recording Studio Rockstar. So got a new camera. I'm learning more about it. And then I was thinking about that versus sound. And it occurred to me, I was like, wow, when you're doing photography though, the talent is not the source of what you're capturing in terms of light. So the light has to come from somewhere else, bounce off of the subject and into the camera lens. Whereas in audio, the sound comes from the subject.
Right.
And maybe bounces off a wall as well as coming directly to a microphone.
Right. So you're containing it the other way is really what you're doing.
Yeah. Just an interesting, that got my brain turning, thinking about stuff. Well, so let's jump forward to some more questions. One of the things I like to ask people, Johnny, is to share an inspirational quote on the top of the podcast to get us kind of excited about hitting the studio. Have you got anything you want to share to get us psyched to hit the studio?
To never give up. I think that is the biggest thing. You will have every reason on earth to stop, but you have to keep going no matter how hard it is, because everything is learning, right? So like I started the traditional way. I started recording, and then my boss gives me a session with an acoustic guitar and a singer. And then I'm recording those two things. And then you work your way up to a full band, and then a full Latin jazz band with 26 inputs, or, then you're good at recording.
Yeah.
And then you move on to mixing and mastering and doing other things. So you get, it's just, you got to keep going because you're constantly learning. So never give up. Even if it seems hard, whatever's difficult to you today will be easy in the future.
Yeah, that's good advice, man. And it also reminds me of that other bit of advice that, talks about how persistence trumps talent every time, which is like a lot of, this wraps around the question of succeeding in music, and the idea that every overnight success story in music is got 10 years of getting ready for it, of hard work or whatever. Right. Just that idea that continuing on and persisting and never taking no for an answer in a music career or in a recording career is really sort of at the essence of making it through and finally having everything accumulate and succeed and go well for you. And it's a cool thing, it's a cool reminder, because there's so many times in recording where you can want to give up, whether it's just technical and just trying to get your mix to sound good, or whether it's financial and you're like, once again, you don't get paid for something, or, something doesn't go well. And you're just like, how am I ever going to, how am I ever going to retire like my friend, the doctor?
Right. I always consider it lesson learned, and you move on to the next thing. Yeah. Plus, if you are able to do this for a profession, consider yourself lucky, because a lot of people say to me, they're like, wow, it's really cool that you could do that. And I'm like, well, I think you think I make more money than you think I do, first of all. Right. And second of all, but you're right, it is pretty cool, because I love it. Yeah. I love doing what I do. I love sound. And all kinds of stuff, like anything like that with music or even sound. Like I'll go outside and I'll clap and I'll see how does it sound when I clap outside in the winter when the leaves come off the trees here.
The best is when it's snowing, how it sounds if you go outside when the snow's falling. Big, thick snowflakes.
Right.
It sounds like you're inside a huge cotton blanket.
Right. So like stuff like that, it's just fascinating. Back when we were in New Jersey, we had my wife and I had this place that was near a cliff, and I was outside clapping and yelling, "Hey!" And my wife comes out and she goes, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Do you hear that? You hear it? It's bouncing back." And I was like, all excited out on the front lawn. And she goes, "Will you get in here? The neighbor's going to think you're crazy." But like, to me, it's exciting. Like, that's like amazing. Like, I went to see my grandmother last year and I drove, her car. And I said, I heard something that the car was making a noise. And I said, "There's something wrong with the car." I said, she's like, "What do you mean? There's like nothing wrong with the car." So she took it in. There was something wrong with the car.
Right.
Because I heard it. So like you'll be amazed what your ears can actually do for you in other aspects.
True, man. I'm always listening to what my car is doing and I feel pretty tuned into it.
Yeah. And you're like, well, that's that weird noise. Like you'll notice any noise that's like out of place, like entirely, anytime. I always do. It's like one of those things.
All right, cool, man. Well, I like to think of cars as a nice hybrid between digital and analog things. So let's kind of jump into our topic of the day too, which is how to sound analog in a digital world. Introduce us to what this topic is about and what it means to you.
Okay, so we come from this world, and so in a real, without going into the history, but we kind of make this switch, the real hardcore switch into the digital world in the very, very, very tail end of the 90s, right? That's our hardtail switch into that. And before that, we were tape machines. They're digital, they're Sony Dash machines and ADAT and all that.
But still it was mechanical. The mechanics were analog.
Right. Yeah. So you switch into Pro Tools in late 1990s, and one of the first albums that I can think of, remember reading about that was kind of like seriously Pro Tools all the way was, do you remember the band Filter and that album Title of Record? That had Take a Picture on it and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah.
Well, that album was all done Pro Tools, all digital, including the amps were Line 6 Pod Farm or Amp Farm.
Wow, I wonder if that was Ben Gross, who's out in LA at the mix room, because I worked with Ben. I remember he was key in creating a lot of those great first Filter records.
I think it actually might have been his, but that
shout out to you, Ben. You're coming on the podcast next, dude.
So, yeah, that was it. So I like that album, but it's interesting if you know that now, know that if you go back and listen to that album, acoustic guitars are of course mic'd up on that album, but all the electric guitars is a plugin called Amp Farm that Line 6 had.
That's right.
And that there are no mic'd amps on that album. So I think that's funny because, that album's 1999. And so here we are almost 20 years later. It's 18 years later. And that's almost the norm for a lot of things now, So that's interesting if you think about that album. That had to be a little bit of a pioneer when it comes to that, and it is all done in Pro Tools and all digitally. They mixed it in that. I don't even think they brought it out to a board or they did any of that. So
I seem to remember also that "Livin' La Vida Loca" was like one of the first big Grammy wins for a Pro Tools record,
right? Too. And that's probably right around the same time. I think it's 98.
Yeah.
I have this uncanny memory for remembering when albums came out and years came, and it's like ridiculous. And my wife goes, "Why do you remember all that?" I'm like, I don't even really try. I just can remember.
You just got a little library in your brain.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that "Livin' La Vida Loca" is 98. Yeah.
That's a trip.
So it's like,
and that was a time when this stuff was all brand new. I remember when Amp Farm came out and we're in the studio and we got this plugin on Pro Tools, and it's like, holy crap, this sounds, you can do all these great tremolos and all kinds of other stuff. It's so quick and easy. I remember when Auto-Tune first came out.
Right.
And it was like, the idea was that, wow, so you can get an inspired first take. And if it's not quite in tune, we can tune it. Of course, now Auto-Tune is something totally different.
Right now
it's just an effect.
Now it's an effect. And I tend to shy away from that as an effect because I think that you can overdo anything.
Yeah.
I think that Why did grunge take over from hair metal? Because hair metal got overdone in the late 80s. So, things like that. And then why did grunge die? Because it got overdone.
Well, let's talk about auto-tune getting overdone for the first time. It was Cher. That was the first big...
also 1998.
Was that 98? Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah. That was the first big album where it was used in an extreme fashion, as I recall. I mean, it was probably being used around that and on other records.
No, that's the first one.
Yeah.
I've done my research on this.
And I love that. So I've always seen that in the creative world, there are new things that arrive, like a wah-wah pedal or whatever. Maybe Hendrix was one of the first guys, I don't know, to use that. But, the idea, and that might not be accurate, so you can correct me if you need to. But
no, they were used before that.
Yeah, but the idea that a new tool comes and then somebody comes along and uses it to an extreme, and then it becomes this big artistic statement. It's no longer overuse. It's like hip and trendy.
Sure.
And I think that's cool, man. I think that when new things are coming now and people see it and they're like, oh my God, this is going to,
No, I don't see any reason for that. So what happened is, though, when digital came out, I think we went overboard. And I say we, I just say the industry kind of went overboard and everybody started ditching, well, we don't need consoles and 1073s and 1176s, and we don't need all these.
That was a good time, dude. You could pick up some great gear.
I know. I was like, if I had a time machine, I would go back, and go grab some more of that stuff because people were throwing that stuff in the garbage, and then they realized, now we've lost a character, and so that character got lost, and everything got really loud. That's the start of everything getting like super loud. And I'm not saying that necessarily things sound bad or anything like that, but like things just sound awfully loud and a little digital,
right,
so to speak. And it's tough because those mic pre's, while they're fine mic pre's, it's just that if there's nothing else going on in it, and because digital is just like this perfect resolution, right? And that's what we're talking about. We're like, digital sounds like crap. And no, it actually sounds like perfect.
Too good.
Yeah, and that's what perfect sounds like. So we're not used to perfect because there is nothing perfect in our world. Even my room here is maybe treated or whatever, but it's not perfect.
Right.
And you as you move your head from side to side, that's also, things change. So we're used to imperfections, little imperfections in rooms and other things. And digital picks that up big time. They'll pick up everything, good or bad. So you have to take a little bit of dirt and noise and put it in there because there's no noise in the digital.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of inject that. Now there's ways that I feel there's ways you could do that. I feel like when you're recording, you can use really decent mic pre's, and you and I, when you came in, we were talking about those Cappy mic pre's.
Which, right. So you said those are sort of designed with similarities to the 1970s APIs or something, right?
Yeah, that's the idea behind him. And this is Jeff Steger. He's here in, Jeff, if I pronounce your last name wrong, I'm sorry, but he's here in Nashville. And
I'll say Steiger just to cover our bases here.
He's here in Nashville, and he you can order them directly from him. He actually sells them as kits, so he can build them to you and send them to you, or you can make them as kits.
That's cool.
So if you really want to make something, you want to save a bunch of money, and you have some soldering
it's fun
skills,
making stuff.
So you can. That's actually his main thing is selling kits. So you can do that, but he has all kinds of different mic pre's, EQs. He has 500 series racks, and it's really based on the 1970s type of API stuff, and it all sounds really good. Actually, that's kind of what you're hearing.
Well, very cool. So one of the things that is nice about those mic pre's is they have transformer in and out.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about what a transformer does to sound and why that is part of the analog sound that is appealing to us that might be lacking in a digital setup.
I think here's what I say that what a transformer does to the sound, and in the simplest terms, is it rounds things that are very sharp and tinny and rounds them off. That's everything. Frequencies, transients, all things like that. It really does make it. They also can bring up bumps in certain frequency ranges and stuff like that. But I think their greatest asset is the way that they smooth out harsh things.
Right. I think that, so a transformer is a coil around an iron core,
Mm-hmm.
and a coil around an iron core as a filter,
Mm-hmm.
kind of electricity can't go through it as instantly. It almost gets bogged down a little bit,
Right.
which is why it's used in a low pass filter,
Right.
for example. And I think that transformers sort of, they soften transients
Right,
and
sure.
make them more appealing. And they also introduce harmonic distortion,
Sure.
which makes things sound a little bit more exciting, right?
Right.
Because you're kind of bringing out all this other information,
Right.
And
And
overtones,
those
and everything.
frequency bumps and things like that are
Yeah.
really, really great, and it's something that's very difficult to replicate and happens differently every time you run through, because electricity is not like digital, right? It's constantly changing, right? So technically a mic pre can sound different as it gets warmer or it gets colder.
Right.
Even
Kind of like a guitar amp, a tube guitar amp.
yeah, it's the same thing. A lot of tube guitar amps need 20 minutes to warm up before they start to sound right. And I know that,
Which is good, because I personally need 25 minutes to warm up before I sound any good.
But yeah, I think that that's a thing. Tubes. So since we're talking about tubes, that's another thing that that's why we don't really make guitar amps that are considered great that aren't tube amps. I mean, there's some, don't get me wrong, but they tend to lean more towards the clean.
Now hold up. What's that funny looking box sitting right down there to your
okay,
lower left?
And that's good. I'm glad that you asked that. So this is my Kemper. And what does the Kemper do? So do you know about them?
I know about them, but I'm happy to have them explained to me from the ground up.
So a Kemper is useless without a real amp to model. So it's an amp modeler. It requires an actual real amp, like my 5150 in the other room.
Okay, cool.
To model. So you can't, it just doesn't, it's not like so line 6, like that amp farm that we talked about. That's digital models of something. This is profiling the actual amp. You have to have a real amp, run it through this profile, capture that real amp, that signal chain, and that's how it works.
It's the FBI of guitar amps.
Yeah. So it doesn't function on its own. So you still need, with a Kemper, you still require real amps to put them in there. You can't just, there's no like blocks where you set things up.
How does it work? Tell us basically how you profile one of your amps.
I haven't profiled any of my amps
yet.
You
haven't done it yet?
I haven't done it, but I kind of know how, I know how it works. It kind of just sends the signal. It reads the recording chain. So it'll read your whole recording chain, including your microphone and your mic pre.
So the Kemper will send a signal out. You probably like plug it into the guitar amp, run it through that, the mic, the mic pre, the compression, or it probably can't do compression,
everything.
Right?
Yes.
Really?
It can do everything.
And then it measures it coming back, and it says there's the profile.
And then you can balance certain things out to get it to sound like you can listen to what you're replicating versus the real thing.
Wow. That's pretty exciting, man.
Yeah. So that's what it does. And it's completely digital. And here's the cool part about that. So for studios or home recording people, it's a wonderful thing because I don't know about you, Lidge, but I can't afford $30,000 worth of amplifiers. I would love $30,000 worth of amplifiers, but I can get in the ballpark, especially this one has the power amp in it.
I can afford that much only if I spend 20 years saving up and acquiring amps.
Right. And I mean, how many people have that? That's my point. I mean, would I love to have $20,000 or $30,000 worth of amps? Sure. And I'll eventually get more amps. I have a few as it is now, but I think this is an easier solution.
Oh, did you say 30? I thought you said $3,000 worth of amps.
Nice. So, I think this is one of those things that toes it. Although it is digital, it toes the line. Plus, if this thing breaks, it breaks.
Just get a fix or something.
You just get another one.
What's the street price on a Kemper these days?
This one is around $2,000.
That's pretty cool, man. And then so what you could do is you could literally
rent them.
borrow amps or rent them from people who have great amplifiers, model them all in there, and start collecting your own world of sounds.
Yes.
Now, can you still tweak sounds within that once you've got it up? So you can change the sound. You can overdrive it more or less and things like that.
And then it has cabinet emulation if you want to go direct, or like mine's in my case, mine is the power amp version. You can bring it out to a real cab and mic it up, which is what I prefer to do with it, actually.
Well, that's cool, man. So, all right. So a couple of ways. Great mic pre's, with transformers, a digital amp that models real tube amps. We're talking about ways to try and analogify your sound before you capture it into Pro Tools or your DAW.
Right. So that digital amp, one of the things that I prefer is to run it out like a real amp to a real speaker cabinet, stick real microphones in front of it, and then that gives you more of that sound.
Okay, cool.
So that's how you do it. Like a lot of people will plug it straight in and they'll do it like that, and that's great, and they sound fine. But if you want to really harness this thing, you have to plug it in to a real cab and then mic it from there. I know that seems counterintuitive, but it is a much easier to get a sound.
One of the things that does, though, is every time you go into the analog realm, you're introducing randomness into your sound again, which always gives it an analog quality. Craig Alvin, who was on my podcast, talked about his mixing setup in the past. I don't even remember if we talked about this on the podcast, but before that, we had talked about the importance of using a real spring reverb in his mix setup. And, he just suggested that as opposed to digital reverbs within the DAW, the spring reverb actually introduces kind of almost like a, what's the word I'm looking for? The noise in digital that allows it to work. The dither. Thank you. Yes. It like introduces a dither to the digital and makes it sound more analog and better that way. So I like that, like taking things out of your DAW, even if they are initiated there, even if you're using a plug-in guitar amp, maybe going out and remiking it through a cabinet.
And that's kind of the idea behind the way that I prefer to use the Kemper, So another thing that I like to do, and in my setup, is I use a summing amplifier. So I have 24 channels out to a summing amplifier, and it sums in those 24 channels, goes back into a SSL style compressor, and then gets re-recorded back in. So
is that the dangerous audio summing?
The dangerous stuff is what I use there. And then we were talking about reverbs. To segue into your reverbs, I have a PCM 81 and a PCM 91. They're lexicons, for those of you who don't know, and they're outboard digital reverbs, but there's something about, again, like you said, and you touched on that, and I think that's important. When I run out to my reverbs, I do not come back into Pro Tools. So if I run out, I stay out and stay analog until everything sums back in again.
Right.
So my reverbs...
It's part of the mix.
Yeah. My reverbs do not go out from Pro Tools and then come back to Pro Tools and then go out. They once they go out, they hit the reverb, they stay analog until the full mix is captured at the end.
Right. So just to clarify, the box, the PCM 91, right? That it's digital inside, but once it spits the sound out, it's now analog coming out of the back of the box.
Right.
And again, it's analog, so therefore it has random qualities to it.
Right.
And that goes into the mix sounding.
And they make those reverbs as a plugin, the Lexicon PCM reverbs. And I have those. And I have done ABs with teaching people, and said, look, let's make everything exactly the same. Let's see if we can replicate it. And they'll be like, man, that's really close. But the outboard one just like sits in a different spot. And it's really hard to describe. And people who don't believe it, they're like, oh, I don't believe that. And it's the truth. It does. So it sits in a different spot. And I think that's the thing. Also, another thing about analog summing is you can actually push your faders up because you're sending that signal out. It does smaller amounts of in the box summing. So I have 24. So obviously I'm usually mixing things that are more than 24 tracks, and some of those things will sum. But let's say I'm using in the box reverbs and delays. They will have their own stereo pair and go out all by themselves and sum with everything else analog later on. So I don't send them with the instruments. I have a reverb and delay 2 channels that they go out, and that's how they hang on it. Or the PCM 81 or 91, they have their own separate 2 channels that they ride on. And I think that little bit of separation, when it comes back together analog, like I said, electricity, the little randomness, even though the dangerous stuff is very clean and so forth and so on, it's just, there's just randomness in
It's electrons.
that just, yeah.
Ain't nobody inventing the electron, you know what I mean?
Right.
They
So
just gotta do their thing.
that sort of thing really makes a difference. Now, if we're talking about in the box, so I know a lot of people I can't afford to buy the summing gear, and I get that. And if you can't, you can't. And if summing doesn't work for you, great. If you rather do it in the box, great. I'm not this guy who goes, you have to have a summing amp. You have to have this outboard reverbs. That's for me. That's what I like. I can prove it to you why I like it better. But if you like the simplicity of mixing in the box and keeping it very simple, so your recall is like ultra fast, which is why I have a summing mixer and not a console.
Right.
So don't.
What are the ways to mix totally in the box where you can still introduce analog qualities to it?
Right. And even I do some of these things. So get a bunch of saturation plugins. So there's a bunch of really cool stuff. Plugin Alliance makes a lot of stuff. They're a plugin company. And there's this plugin they make called Black Box, which simulates like a tube distortion.
Oh, is that is it Sarno? Is that his name? Who, my roommate actually is a pedal steel player, and he just bought a Black Box.
Right,
So there's
a real one.
And I apologize for the creator for not pronouncing the name right, but it's a tube DI box that is intended as an interface for your pedal steel. But my friend Adam Long up in St. Louis had been collecting them for the past couple of decades as a secret weapon for the studio and for mixing.
No,
you just run it right
This is made for like the mix
cool.
mix bus. So
yeah,
they
this is the model, the digital model of that.
The digital model, and then there's the the VSM Vertigo VSM 3, and that actually you can handle second order and third order harmonics on it, and you could put it on anything, or you could run it on your mix bus, or you could do things like that, and it could be really subtle, and it does that thing does really, it's amazing, just really subtle stuff. Sound Toys, so
yeah,
Decapitator.
That there's one I've used recently too, is the Audified U78, which is it's meant to be the tube circuit of the U73B compressor.
Wow.
But it does some wonderful stuff. You can just put it on there slightly and do some great things. And then Chris James shared a hack using the Lo-Fi plugin from DigiDesign. He said, put that on any sound or your mix bus. And I think you set the, I forget which threshold it was, but you just set it to like 1.
Wow.
So like normally you'd go to 50, 70% and you'd really hear it, like freak things out. But you set the distortion, I think it was, to just 1. Right. And it makes that subtle difference.
Cool.
It's cool.
You also have the Sans amp right inside of Pro Tools. So for those of you with Pro Tools, mess around with that little Sans amp. That thing it's pretty cool. And there's lots of little different distortion. And don't be afraid to throw a little bit of that on a snare or a snare sample or your 808, or don't think because traditionally that's not what you do in this world, that world, or whatever the case may be. Well, that analog and that distortion thing is for rock and roll, or it's for this, or no. Like put some of that stuff, put it in dance and hip hop and all that stuff, because it ends up making stuff sound fatter and not where it's distorting like a guitar
like
amp.
Fat with a PH.
Yeah, fat with a PH.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I mean the Sans amp is useful everywhere in the studio.
Right. And it's just, and that's a free one that you can use. And in some of these plugin companies, now is a really good time, like till the end of the year to get plugins. That's where you You scoop them up.
Well, by the time this comes out, we'll be past Christmas, but
Yeah.
we'll be close. Chad Blake, of course, comes to mind. He's a great advocate of the Sans amp and has traditionally used it all the time on all kinds of sounds in a mix. So it's kind of cool to set it up as a send and return.
Mm-hmm.
I think traditionally somebody sees that and we think Sans amp, oh, you plug a guitar into it and it simulates a guitar amp and you take the output. And that's great. And you can get some great guitar sounds that way. I particularly like using it for bass when I'm mixing, because you can really dial in your amp sound and sort of control. You can have it speak in the mix where you're wishing you could hear the bass speak a little more. Or you could just put
it in parallel and just slide it in behind it or something.
Yeah.
Just do something like very, very, very subtle. I mean, why do people like distressors? Why do people like 1176s? Because that's what they do in LA2A. They put that little bit of distortion behind something, and it just makes it feel bigger and so forth and so on. It's like that old adage when you're recording guitars, back off the distortion a little bit and add a few more guitars, and it'll sound bigger than if you try to put a whole bunch of distortion on a guitar. Do a little bit. And I feel the same. That's kind of what I feel about mixing or mastering or anything with compression, or do a little bit to a lot, and it makes it all sound much bigger. I really
it's like an accumulation of little things.
Right. Yeah. Just don't try one little thing, and don't be afraid to try it. Just go, okay, on my drum bus, I'm going to try a little bit of this distortion on this drum bus, or on the bass, I'm going to try a decapitator on the bass, or on my guitars, I'll add a little Sans amp. I'll take the DI. Let's say you have some distorted guitars. Take the DI, throw the Sans amp on the DI, and blend the DI with the Sans amp into the back, and see if you can make the guitars a little bigger.
Yeah.
Right. See what you can do. Just if it doesn't work, then don't use it. But that's the point. Try it, because next time you may go, I know it can fix that.
Speaking of Ben Gross, that's a really cool trick I remember learning from him when we were mixing at the mix room. He would have a Sans amp on a parallel channel, and it'd be muted during the verse, and he'd drop it in on the chorus, and it would take those same guitars or the same bass and just make it feel a little bit bigger and more powerful when the chorus lands. Mm-hmm. So that would just help the chorus kind of explode a little more, which is cool.
Right. And one of the big things that a lot of people don't realize about like some big sounding guitar albums is that everybody goes, well, you take your guitars and you pan these left and right, and then that's what you have. Well, you're missing the middle. So maybe you do left and right, and then you take another take of the same thing and put it down the middle and just put it way lower. So it actually sits behind the vocal and everything. Makes everything sound gigantic.
Nice.
It's a very big way, because what is it doing? You have another distorted guitar in the middle. So you're filling up harmonically the picture without overtaking the vocal or whatever the case may be. Yeah. But that's a really big trick that's on 1,000,001 big giant distorted guitar albums,
And are you maybe dropping that in for the whole mix, or just when the choruses are landing?
You can leave it there the whole time. If you listen to Master of Puppets by Metallica,
that's a pretty good record.
Yeah. It's there the whole time.
Trip.
And you can listen if you want to listen for it. Listen to the beginning of Master of Puppets where the guitar is panned to the left, and you'll hear it's really to the left in the center.
Interesting.
Instead of just really hard left, it's left and center when it goes to the left, because the left and the center were left on, and because the center is far back, it makes it sound like it's still to the left.
Yeah, that's cool. I totally remember discovering Master of Puppets with my roommate when I was in college in St. Louis, and just thinking like, holy shit, this is awesome.
Right. And that album is incredible. So what they did with a lot of that stuff is took microphones, and there were 2 amps, 3 microphones on each, 2 close, 1 far, and then combined them at the Trident console, combined them right then and there. So then they just mixed them like that when they were recording them.
Just commit to it. Yeah.
They commit it like going in. And so you have everything is super huge because you have all these microphones going in at once. Plus, another weird thing about Master of Puppets, what a lot of people don't realize, is a lot of the album is tuned to 435, not 440.
Oh, getting all tricky with the tuning.
So it's a little bit lower, which
Yeah.
gives it that little kind of, I guess, that evil type of sound or whatever you want to call it. But
Well, I know there are alternate tunings like that talk about being more in harmonic um, convergence with the resonance of the earth.
right.
That
No,
sort
no,
of thing.
no. And I think there's some, if you're ever playing along to Master of Puppets and it doesn't quite sound right, it's because your guitar is not tuned to 435.
Or your turntable sucks.
I guess, yeah.
Or that cassette copy you made way back when.
Oh my God, I went through so many cassette copies of Master of Puppets before I
That's
got it
great.
on CD.
All right, well, so let's keep jumping forward. Any other particular elements of getting an analog sound in the digital world that we didn't cover yet that you want to talk about?
I think
anything in the mixing or the mastering stage.
I think stacking. So before I talked about using a little with a lot, but I think stacking compressors and distortion things, but compressors especially, right? So instead of trying to nail something with an 8-to-1, try a 2-to-1 compressor with this kind of compressor and a 2-to-1 compressor with this kind of compressor. There's no rule in like, unlike the analog world where you run out of things, you don't run out of things. So try combining an LA2A style plugin with an 1176 plugin, like in series with each other.
Yeah.
Why not? So when I do a lot of mastering stuff, I'll stack things. I do a bunch of different compressors, but little tiny compression.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. So it's just kind of gluing it together. I know that's a buzzword that gets used a lot. But
here's another thing that you have as an advantage in the digital world. You could do what you described, put a 1176 and then put a LA2A after it and put a little compression on it. Listen to that vocal, see what you think. And then you could go, well, let me try putting them on parallel tracks and maxing them out more and see what that sounds like. And with all the endless options and variations, sometimes it can be daunting because you're losing your perspective when you're trying to decide what sounds better than another thing. But the nice thing about the digital world is you can save sessions. So you can do a session with one setting, bounce it real quick, do another session, do a totally different quick idea with a different setting,
right?
Bounce that. And then with fresh ears, go back and listen and see which one really does sound better. Like you might listen,
right?
You might lose your perspective when you're doing it, but then come back later and listen and go, oh my God, the vocal sounds so much better on this other one where it turns out I didn't put any compressors on it,
right?
You know? But you've got that saved DAW so you can pull it up and actually pick up where you left off.
Well, let's think about it. You could do something like, instead of using one microphone on the lead vocal, why not take two really different monsters like an SM7 and like a U87 and record them both? See what, and it maybe on some tracks you use one, on others you use a blend of the two, and who knows? So like you could do that now because you don't have to be afraid I'm going to run out of tape. I'm going to run out of tracks. I don't have anything. So you could try those things, and if it doesn't work, then you don't have to use it.
So use one of them.
You know, like I say, with drum kits, chuck a bunch of extra mics up there. Now the problem with drum kits is you got to deal with phase all day long.
Well, and the problem with chucking a bunch of extra and doing it is do that as a way to capture something that might be useful later, but watch out for falling into the perils of like not committing.
Right.
So one of the things that happens to me when I start throwing up a bunch of mics is I inevitably start listening to the drum set with 20 mics on it and imagining that they're somehow all going to work together.
Right.
And they never do.
And they never do.
They never do.
Not once. Not once have I
taken
taken 20 mics and they've ever worked.
Yeah. And then I have to come back and I'm like, all right, Lidge, come on, mute, get rid of all these things and start over. And then I'm like, oh yeah, the original mics sound great. But what's cool about that extra mic is now you cut to a section of the song and you can completely cut to that one, booty mic you hooked up or whatever for the drums, or the one that you put on the floor underneath the drummer's stool,
right? Or
a chest mic you hung off the body of the drummer, and just use that for a section and it sounds really cool.
Right. And I think that, just because you take them doesn't mean you have to use all of them. And that's another mentality that you need to get out of your head. And I'm not saying just throw up mics for the sake of throwing up mics and committing to everything while going to tape is I'm very cautious about that. I like to use a good mic pre, maybe a compressor on some things like a bass or like a vocal, and that's very light compression. and then I can deal with it later. But you gotta get it sounding right. Here's the problem. I was talking to my friend Brian about this morning, and one of the pitfalls that people they fall into is that they're recording things, and then they think that I'm going to add all these things going in because it sounds really good going in, right? And everything could sound really good going in, and then it gets in, and then it's all taken up. It's like putting 40 people in a 10 by 10 room. It's going to get too crowded. So I say, if you be careful how much thickness you want to add when you're recording too, because you can always put it in later, and you don't want the room to get too crowded because you're not thinking, you're not mixing as you're going along. That's not the way things work. I mean, you could, and I recorded a lot of jazz, so I was very less is more. Very, very few compressors. I would put light compression on vocal, light compression on bass, and everything else is just mic pre straight in.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could get really nice rough mixes by just bringing up faders and doing some pans.
Yeah, then you're dealing with mic positioning and placement and relative levels.
So my I guess what I'm saying is my advice is deal with that. Deal with mic positioning and stuff like that more than trying to use every digital thing that you have on the way in, because it's gonna change, right? When it gets to the mix, how much things change. How many times, Lidge, you tell me, how many times have you brought up a snare and you brought it up on solo and you're like, God, this sounds terrible, right? and then you put it back into your mix and you're like, man, that actually sounds great in the mix. It's like, or vice versa, where you got it soloed up and you're like, man, that's amazing, and you bring it in the mix and it's gone because the bass ate it up,
right? Exactly.
Or something else like that, So
yeah, true. All right, well, so a couple more questions. This sounding analog thing. What are some of the benefits to sounding more analog, which you kind of already talked about, but also what are some of the drawbacks to sounding more analog? What are things we're going to run into?
Okay, let's go with drawbacks first. So drawbacks, again, if you use too much, then it gets noisy, and then you're like, because people tend to like things. We've almost, now we've been doing the digital world for almost 20 years. So people tend to like things to be a little bit more clear and clean sounding.
Yeah, we expect things to be under control.
Right, under control. And I'm not saying it, you got like things like, Chris Stapleton, that's kind of the best of both worlds, but it's still not, noisy. You don't want it to be noisy. If you go back and you hear some old stuff, some of it can get a little bit noisy before they had tape hiss reduction. And if you get too much of that, then it gets a little distracting, and it depends on the kind of music. If you're in the club and it's going to be turned up to like 1 million, and
any little bit of noise, you're going to hear that.
You're going to hear that. So like you have to think about that. You have to think about, be careful, because you send it to your mastering engineer, and this is a pitfall, and I get this a lot, Lidge, where they send it to me and they're like, man, this sounds so great, and I put all these compressors and all this distortions on it, it sounds amazing, and then I'm putting it into mastering and I'm raising the volume, and then all I've got is shh, and it's like, oh my God, it sounds like one of those the tube TVs when you couldn't get the station in, and it's like, and you're like, hey, do you got like a distortion generator on your mix bus or whatever? Yeah, man, I got like that, the slate tape.
Right.
Yeah. And you're like, well, that thing's awesome. Do me a favor, leave it on, but turn down the actual, the noise. Cause on the tape noise. So on those plugins, like the Slate one and the UA ones, you can actually turn down the tape noise and still get the benefits.
Yeah. And it's in the settings area. You click through the settings.
So think about that before you send it to the mastering engineer. And that's another thing. As somebody who masters a lot, when you send something to another mastering engineer, they're going to give you a different perspective. So I suggest always sending it to someone else. Or if you don't, get your buddies to listen to it, and they'll give you an opinion, because you might not miss it. You'll be like, oh, I love this. I love it. And then there's distortion all over it. And you're like, and you didn't hear it. and then you send it off to the artist and they're like, what's that noise? And so send it to your buddies if you don't have any. But I know that, and Lidge, you could probably say the same thing. I know we're friends with each other. I know that we're technically competition with each other, but
Who, you and me?
Yeah.
Nah.
But we're friends. Generally engineers and producers are friends with other engineers and producers, and we share stuff with each other. That's the thing, sharing all this, figuring all that stuff out.
Yeah.
So that's a pitfall. The other question was what is great?
Well, benefits, which you really answered in the beginning, just talking about some of the qualities of
bigger.
Right.
And less
a little more
digital.
like real world.
A little more like the real world,
Yeah.
even though it's kind of not, right? Because I remember my boss, Day, my mentor, he said to me that we're just a bunch of BS artists. We're trying to make everybody feel like this was all done, like they're sitting right in front of them, and it's not true. We have a kick drum mic that's 2 inches from the kick drum and an SM57 sitting on the snare, and you can't put your ear next to a snare and somebody hits it with you'll go deaf. So
Yeah.
we're liars. We're like taking pictures of things and then putting a big picture together. So that's that kind of thing.
That's wild. Well, Rockstars, we're going to take a break right now, and we'll come right back in a moment for the jam session. A reminder that all the great stuff we're talking about here today with Johnnie Truesdale, I'll include links in the show notes. You can just click through if you're on your mobile device or on your laptop. Just click through. You can go to rsrockstars.com and use the magnifying glass and search for Johnnie too, and that'll take you right to it. But we'll see you guys in just a moment for the jam session. Cheers. Roswell Pro Audio brings you microphone design that is out of this world. Endorsed by a growing list of artists and producers like Phil Collen of Def Leppard, Ross Hogarth, who's recorded Van Halen, Ziggy Marley, and the Doobie Brothers, and Super Dupes, working with Drake, Mary J. Blige, and Eminem. These are all rock stars that have discovered just how great Roswell microphones sound. Check out the Mini K47, which uses a capsule modeled on the one in the vintage U47 at a street price of only $299. Or the beautiful Delphos condenser microphone with a capsule tuned like the vintage U67 with great clarity and far lower noise at a street price of only $899. In fact, you are hearing my voice right now on the beautiful Delphos microphone. These mics are carefully crafted by hand and immediately feel good even before you plug them in and hear how great they sound. These are well-built microphones that will last you and your studio a lifetime of great recording. Check out more audio examples of these awesome mics at roswellproaudio.com. Hey Rockstars, Lid Shaw. We're here with Recording Studio Rockstars. We're going to jump into the jam session now with my guest today, Johnnie Truesdale. We are at Firefly Sound here in Brentwood, Tennessee, Johnny's awesome new studio. And actually, Johnnie, I didn't ask you about your speakers there. What are those? Those look super cool.
They're Adam A77Xs.
Nice. So it's got a ribbon tweeter in the middle.
Ribbon tweeter in the middle.
Looks
and
cool,
then it's
man.
almost like a kind of a three-way.
It looks like a robot face, like a giant.
I know that's what everybody says.
Gorilla face.
It's like it's angry that you didn't get your mix right at all times.
What's the game my daughter plays on the phone all the time? Temple Run.
Oh yeah,
these are two of those beasts chasing me as I'm trying to mix.
That's what you're not the first person to say that, and I kind of like it like that. So it's because I have these isolation stands on there.
Yeah, they look like
and they're sideways.
mouth.
I bought the ones that are sideways because I just like the way that they sit on those stands better. I didn't want to get these gigantic stands to take up all the space, so it looks like two eyes, two nose holes, and a big grumpy mouth.
That's great.
It's pretty cool looking.
All right, so are you ready to jam?
I am.
All right, cool, man. When you started out in recording, what was holding you back?
Fear.
Dig it? How'd you get over it? What'd you do about it?
I just started doing it. And
are you afraid now?
No.
I'm not doing a good enough job, man.
No.
You should be shaking in your boots.
No, never. Not now. I think that's what it is now. It's like when I was younger, I used to be afraid of heights. Now I'm not because I did it.
Right.
Just do it and you'll lose it.
Yeah. I remember the feeling before sessions when I was younger, tomorrow would be a tracking session with the band coming in and I was the engineer responsible for it. And oh my God, I was sweating bullets. I couldn't really sleep. I couldn't relax.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, there was so much worry around it. Mm-hmm. And everything was just fine. You just had to go through the motions, you know? And as you get better, I think you prepare for things better and you you sort of leave less room for disaster.
Go out and exercise. That'll help too.
Yeah, indeed.
No, for real. Like, so I was thinking today, I was like, oh, this interview thing, this might be a little stressful. And then I went out for a run. I'm like, this will be fine.
Yeah.
That's it. So sometimes just things like that, just clearing your head. Do something not musical, clear your head.
It's not one of the questions on here, but well, it is some of the best advice. Maybe we should just share this advice. You might have something ready, but I think both you and I have adopted an attitude of trying to, as we age in recording, we want to stay young and healthy. You exercise and stuff like that. Do you have any comments you want to make about the importance of exercising and having a health regimen around? Why does that matter with recording?
I'm going to tell you why it matters, because I like to run. So this year I set a goal for myself that I'm going to run 100 miles a month.
Nice, man.
So I am about to eclipse that 1,200 miles for the entire year of 2017. And I go out there no matter what, no matter how cold. This morning, it was like 25 degrees out?
Yeah, it was about 24, 25.
Yeah, I went out and I ran. But I will get the best ideas and clarity on maybe something I was having a problem with, whether it's wiring something up, whether it's it'll remind me that I have to order something for the studio, or I have to just something. It'll give me clarity on something that I wouldn't have thought of. I think very clearly. I was like, man, if I could mix and run at the same time, my mixes would be amazing. You have
no idea. You know how many times I've thought about, man, if I could only just go for a run and listen to the podcast and make edits while I was running, it'd be heaven.
Right. So it removes, it really clears your thoughts. It's a very, I think everybody find something that you love. I love to run, but yours might be lifting weights or doing yoga or whatever. It doesn't matter. I think you need to get away from this sometimes, even though I said never stop. Get away from it, clear your mind. But exercise is a great way to just clear your mind.
Well, I think exercise allows you to never stop, because the truth is the recording industry has changed since when I started. When I started out, it was in a studio, and sure, you might sit in a chair at the desk when you're mixing, but there was still a lot of movement. There were knobs to grab. You had to run around and move mics. You had to go over to the tape machine. You're moving around. And, I feel like digital stuff is wonderful, but we also got kind of a bum deal, because this active, exciting, creative environment turned into sitting in a chair with your arms at your side, clicking a mouse, stuck to a mouse and a keyboard. And that is really fighting at our ability to stay healthy as we get older. So, you really have to counter that. You have to make sure that you're ergonomically sitting correctly if you're going to listen to speakers and stare at a screen.
Which is why I have nice chairs. Buy yourself a nice chair. I have those Aeron chairs. I think that my wife bought this one right here. This one she bought for me 10 years ago. And that's also very helpful. Buy a nice chair. Another benefit of using that's another thing to think about, like faders and stuff like that. So I have a little control surface, and it makes things more tactile, where you're touching things. And I think that's another thing to, people are like, well, it's all in the box. And it's like, well, yeah, but really that there's a reason that people think knobs are cool. It's kind of like, it feels like you're actually doing something.
Yeah. And get up out of that chair and walk around and check how it sounds in all the different parts of the studio and the room.
Well, that's a good point, because I was talking about this with somebody where I said, you keep working on something and you keep working on something, and then it's going nowhere. And you have to learn to stop and walk away and walk outside, go get a drink of water. I have a cat next door. I love that little cat. And I will stop. I will pause what I'm doing, when I'm mastering something or mixing something. I will go next door, get a glass of water, and hang out and talk to the cat and pet the cat. It has nothing to do with music, and it'll change your perspective, and you'll come back in and it's like a completely different thing. So even just little things like going to pet the cat, or going outside and looking at the trees in my backyard, or whatever the case may be. Don't get me wrong, my studio's nice, and it's a nice environment, but sometimes that you just need to remove yourself from that and go do something completely unrelated to that.
Yeah, indeed. I think that's good advice, man. Well, now let's jump forward and share with the rock stars a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something that they could use on their very next session today.
I think here's something that I've just started doing. I have been using a compressor just on a parallel compressor, just on my drums, but
Nice.
just certain drums. So like just like maybe like the overheads and maybe the kick and the snare, and just kind of blending that in. I know that you've heard that it's like a million times, parallel compression, but I think like that's tamed the cymbals a little bit. It is a good way to, if the cymbals sound super harsh or something like that. And look, that sort of thing can work even on electronic type of stuff too. So if you have a drum machine, try that. Try putting a parallel compression on a drum machine track. See what that does for you, and blend it in. You know. So I think that's something that but be very, very subtle about it. Like maybe just kick, snare, and overheads, or just overheads.
Yeah.
And parallel. You know, so mix everything in and just see if it just gives you just a little bit more.
It's almost like adding that subtle harmonic saturation beneath your mix, you know?
Right. And just it is, sometimes that's all that's doing. It's just that one compressor is just handling that, you know, that's it.
Well, that's a good tip, man. I like that. And you're right. We hear about parallel compression, but I think all the tricks that we hear about all the time and even take for granted, I think it's always great to keep rehearing about them. Like it's good to always be a student. And pretty much every time I hear about something, I'm just reminded of something to try again, even if it's the same thing I thought I was doing before.
I've got another one if you want.
Sure.
I just thought of another one.
Yeah.
So here's a good one. That all guitars, acoustic or not, have really, really, really terrible harsh frequency somewhere between about 1.7 kilohertz and like 3.2 kilohertz. So 1.7 to 3.2. There's at least one. Sometimes there's more than one. Okay. And there's this harsh, pingy, terrible noise that every guitar emanates. It's going to be depending upon the guitar, it's going to be in a different spot. Go in, find it, and notch it out on every guitar in your mix.
Interesting.
And it will make your guitar sound so much better.
And you think we hear this on acoustic and electric?
That's absolutely there.
What do you think it comes from? The pick or the bridge or something like that, or something like a metal string?
I don't know. It may be, but when you find it, you'll hear it and you'll be like, oh my God, this is awful. And then if you take it out of all your guitars, you'll be surprised actually what it does for the clarity of your guitars.
And a notch, Rockstars, is of course a very, very steep filter notch at that point. So for the most part, if you notch out a frequency, you're not going to really notice it. It's not going to mess up your sound or anything.
Right.
Like doing a huge, big, wide dip in an EQ. Right. But you can take out that one harsh frequency and it can give you this sudden, like, wow, that just sounds better.
And Pro Tools you can do it right with the Pro Tools EQ. The Fab Filter one is really excellent. And the one that I like the most, it's actually totally made for that. It's made by Mick DSP called the NF575. That's all it does.
Nice.
It's just a notch filter. And then you just notch out that frequency. But I guarantee it. Try it out. You'll be like, wow, I never realized it was there. And it doesn't matter if it's distorted or not, or acoustic or clean, or it's always there.
And you said it was somewhere between 1.5 kilohertz and 3.2 or something like that?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Great. Awesome.
Mostly between Good 2 tip. And 3 is where you're going to get it. But you'll be blown away. You're gonna be like, oh my God, it's there in every one. And if it's the guitar, it seems to be guitar centric. So what I can tell is if it was the same guitar, that's where it is on that guitar. So like that ESP.
So less the amp, more the guitar than the amp.
It's actually the guitar. That's why I say it's the acoustic guitar. Yeah. So that ESP Eclipse over there in the corner is going to have a different notch frequency than my Les Paul.
That's a trip, man. All right, well, so let's jump forward. How about sharing a hardware tool in the studio, something physical that always seems to make your sessions better?
Recording, mixing, mastering?
Something physical, doesn't matter.
Okay. I would say that I really like this, my bus compressor. It's made by TK Audio out of Sweden. And it's like an SSL bus style bus compressor. But what's really cool about that one is it's detinant, so you can recall it perfectly.
Nice.
So, yeah, I think that's the thing that I use a lot. I even use it when I'm mastering because it has like it's a modified version of the SSL bus compressor, and it has like a 1.5 on it.
Oh, for super subtle
Stuff. So
compression.
You could do that. And then it has
1.5 ratio, Rockstars.
Yeah, 1.5 ratio. And then it has this little button, this harmonic, the THD button. See that red button there, Lidge? That is it puts a little harmonic distortion in it.
Total harmonic distortion.
Just a little tiny bit. And I think that's the thing that I really like a lot.
That's cool. Dig it. All right, cool. Now, how about a software tool? Something, whether it's a favorite or just something that's kind of cool you want to share with the rock stars?
I think that everybody should get the Sound Toys bundle.
I'm with you on that.
Everybody who is, I don't care if you're doing this as a professional. I don't care if it's just a hobby. It doesn't matter. I think you should, those effects, and now that they're branching into reverbs now and other things too, I mean, there's so much. Those are some of the greatest tools that you can use. Echo Boy, that delay, that's my delay.
Yeah.
I don't care about any other delay. That's my delay.
Those effects in the Sound Toys bundle are so deep, it's going to take me years before I feel like I kind of know them all, if I ever do.
Right.
I'm still learning them constantly.
Yeah, they have stuff that'll take your guitar and make it sound like a synthesizer. It's like crazy. So it has traditional effects, and then it has distortion generators and then delays, and now they have a reverb. And I don't know if you've seen that little
the little plate. Yeah. I just was testing it out the other day. It's super cool.
It's super cool. And so they go on sale quite often. Get the whole bundle. They're a tiny operation in Vermont, and they won't. You don't get charged every 5 seconds you turn around for a plugin from them. You buy it, and then when a new one comes out, they're very reasonable about it. Like when the next one comes along, it's not like you have to spend tons of money. Like the UA stuff is very expensive. I have most of that, but it's very expensive. But something like that is really good for. I think everybody should have it. If you work with me, I'm going to make you buy it. So.
Nice, man. Nice. And yeah, I think like when I got it, I just got the Sound Toys 5 bundle or whatever.
5 bundle.
Yeah. And it's everything.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, how about a resource for the business side of this, for people, a resource or advice for people who might want to do this for more than just a hobby?
I think that get yourself, I'll give you a resource. I think GoDaddy works very good when it comes to website and having an FTP with your website. That's how I send files back and forth. So I think in GoDaddy, I've been with them for a lot of years right now, and they make it really easy, and they give you really good deals, and they make it really simple, and it always works. Like their stuff always works. My website never goes down. My FTP never goes down.
Great.
So it's like, that is a really great resource that I use, is get yourself, GoDaddy is really excellent.
Give us a really quick FTP tutorial. Why would we be interested in using something like that instead of, just retransfer and Dropbox and these kind of common things that we know about?
Okay. Well, I mean, the reason is you own it. Nobody else can get into it. It doesn't expire. I've been able to leave something up there for a client, and they've come to me and they've been like, "Hey, I lost my masters."
Yeah.
I'm like, go to the FTP. They're up on your FTP. They're still there. And they're like, "Oh my God, that's so amazing." So there's a reason. It's also secure for that one client.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody can get to it.
So you can create a password and a name.
Mm-hmm.
Like when somebody sends you a Vimeo link and it's like, here's the password to go see the Vimeo video. It's like that.
Right. But think of it like it's like cloud file storage, but for that project, for your project. And I like to put everything up there. So like you get into mixes, and you put them up there. You just get them up there because you never know. I mean, I always assume that everything's going to burn to the ground and I'm going to lose all data, right? But those servers are not here. They're in Arizona, I believe, somewhere. So, and that stuff's all backed up. They back it up for you. It's like part of the deal. And it's not even that much money to deal with this stuff. It's free. You don't have to pay for that extra service. It's part of your website service and part of that fee that you buy. So you might as well use it.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, well, you're not supposed to leave it up there because, we could take it down. They never take it down.
Right. There's another great little app for Mac that I used to use. I'm not using it now, but if I was doing FTP stuff again, I think I'd probably check it out again. It's called File Shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just this little, you can have the icon on your desktop and you just go drop a file on it and it kind of shoots it up to the FTP and gives you the link, which you can go drop in an email to somebody.
Oh, that's neat.
It's pretty hip too.
I use a program called Fetch for that.
Right. I remember Fetch. Fetch is a great one.
But
so very cool. All right, cool. Now, how about this is similar, but like an organizational online resource. Any other tools that you use to keep your shit together that you want to tell the rock stars about?
Get yourself a Gmail account because you can really organize your stuff within your Gmail account. You can organize your folders. You can use that now. You can also have your domain one default to your Gmail. So you can have, like, if you're Johnny at fireflysound.net, can go to my Gmail and I can organize it all in Gmail. So I would say that Gmail is a very good organizational thing. You can put things on your calendar in that. You can, that sort of stuff. So any of that, you can do with Gmail. I think, yeah, Gmail specifically.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I use it like crazy. I mean, it's tied to Google Drive, which I use all the time.
Yep.
It's tied to YouTube. I use YouTube for all kinds of things.
Right. And you can send stuff up to YouTube from there, and it's all kind of like tied together. And I think it works.
Sometimes it's easier to find an old project by going into Gmail and searching that person's name and, MP3, and there it is. There's that mix that you sent them.
I found a conversation that I had with someone like 5 years ago. I was like, oh yeah, what did I say to them about that? And I looked at them like, cool. So that's another thing where you can say, like, because if you get clients, right, they come back, right? And that you will forget how much you charge them or something. Because maybe you charge them a different deal or whatever the case may be, So you want to go back and see what you charge them, because then you can go, all right, well, in 2013, I charged you this much, and it's 2017, so this is my rate or whatever. So
exactly.
you're armed with
information.
That was then. This is now.
Empowered with knowledge. And Rockstars, here's another tip. I've mentioned it before on the podcast, but I'll bring it up again now that we're talking about Gmail. Check out the plugin for Gmail called Boomerang. So that's it's free initially, and I think I'm subscribed to it because I use some of the deeper features in it at $10 a month or something like that. But it will let you send a Gmail email to somebody and then click at the bottom to boomerang it, where it sends it back to you in a couple of weeks, or it sends it back to you if they don't open it, or if they don't reply, or if you're, communicating with a client, you're like, I'd really like to check in with these guys in 3 months just to sort of see how they're doing and see if they want to do another project. You can send that last email to them and then click the boomerang link for 3 months from now, and it'll come back.
That's cool.
So let's jump back. Let's just jump right forward to the very last question. This one's hypothetical, Johnny, but we're going to take the Wayback Machine, the Wayback Studio machine. You're going to go back to, Englewood, New Jersey, maybe Bennett Studios, maybe earlier than that, and find young Johnny. And you will have a chance to give yourself one bit of advice. You want to say, Johnny, this is the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself?
Stop worrying. Everything's going to be fine.
Good advice. Can I stop worrying now?
I think that's the thing. Like, man, I was really worried at first. I was like, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do this. I don't know that I'm any good at this. What if people think I'm a phony or like whatever, which doesn't make any sense, if you really think about it.
Now that phony is with a PH, right?
Right.
Okay, cool.
So, don't worry. It'll be fine in the future.
Don't worry.
Yeah, don't
be happy.
Yeah, Bobby McFerrin. But no, not you. Don't have to
YouTube
be happy.
Will flag this video podcast now just because I sang those two.
No, I just think that's a thing, because I think people get in their own head about what they can and can't do. And I did early on. I was awfully worried. And then I just stopped.
Let's
worrying.
own it right now. What in your head is something that you're worried that you can't do right now? What's at that next level for you personally?
Generate enough money by opening this new studio.
Nice. Okay. I think mine is to be a successful artist on stage performing my own original music for people, and they love it, and I'm getting my records out there.
Wow.
There we go. Let's own it, man.
Let's own it.
Let's just believe. Let's not worry.
Right.
But
I'm not going to worry.
Okay.
I'm just going to make it happen.
All right, cool. Rockstars, if you're watching this on YouTube now, if you're at the blog post or anywhere else, or you want to just send me an email, lidge@rsrockstars.com. Send us a message. Let us know what's the next level for you? What do you see yourself wanting to do that seems outside of your reach right now?
Oh, that's a great one.
Let's put that together for all of us.
Yeah, that would be cool to see.
Johnny, thanks so much for being with us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Awesome stuff, dude. I love what you're doing here with your studio. Feels great. You live in a great place, and way to stay healthy. I think you told me you're 45 now. I just turned 50, and it's good to see that you'll be doing this for a long time.
That old studio rock stars is what this is, right?
Yeah. maybe just this episode, and not really so much either. I get emails from listeners. I've gotten one from somebody who's like, I'm 70 years old and I really enjoy the podcast. So we have rock stars listening from teens all the way up through, I don't know about octogenarians yet, but septuagenarians for sure.
That's great though. I think that's, you never stop learning, right? So
exactly, man. Why would we do this if it wasn't so much fun that we didn't want to just keep learning it the whole time?
Thank you for having me on.
What a pleasure. Let the rock stars know how they can find you, follow you, and learn more about you.
JohnnieTruesdale.com, JohnnieTruesdale.com, or fireflysound.net is another way you can get a hold of me. Also have Firefly Sound Nashville on Facebook, and J Truesdale on Instagram as well.
Cool, man. Awesome, dude. Well, thank you again. I look forward to maybe we'll go for a run sometime. I don't know.
We can go for a run, sure.
Dig it.
We gotta go. We gotta go. It has to be more than like 3 miles though, or it doesn't count.
Okay, all right. That's just a warm up. That's just stretching.
Right.
All right, cool, man. Well, again, thanks for being on the show, and we'll look forward to seeing more of you around Nashville.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.